All right, let's now welcome Khanyiso Tshwaku, Sports 24 senior reporter, as well as commentator. Khanyiso, a very good afternoon to you. Great having you with us. Huge expectations, I suppose, in the first test match against Ireland come Saturday. The reigning champions there, and Coach Erasmus making quite a statement by looking at the composition of their squad.
Well, good afternoon to you and the viewers. He has to, because I think at the end of the day, it's South Africa's first home test as double World Cup reigning champions. Also, it's one of those series where you put results ahead of development. It kind of makes sense that Erasmus has picked what he deems to be his strongest team. Available for it is a very strong Irish side. Remember that South Africa have lost their last 3 test matches against Ireland. You actually have to go back to 2016, the last time South Africa actually won a test match against Ireland. That was back in Gqeberha where they won 1913. So it makes sense. It makes sense that with this, I mean, remember that there's also the Portugal test where a lot of players can, especially the younger players, can actually put their feet into the waters of test match rugby to see how reasonably deep they are. But I think with the next 2 test matches, starting with this one here at Loftus Versfeld on Saturday, following with next week at Kings Park in Durban, the idea is to win and everything else will fall into place.
I mean, looking at the lineup for the test matches, Khanyiso, I mean, it's quite a season, right, in terms of lineup, and we understand that their last match will be, of course, in Cardiff on the 23rd of November. So what do you think is currently at stake? More bragging rights or just national pride at this stage?
It's both. And the fact that Ireland, remember, have not been past the quarterfinal of a World Cup. They beat South Africa in the pool stages, and they would have felt that having won that particular contest, maybe the last year would have been their year. But New Zealand had a bit of a different say about that in the quarterfinal where they met in Paris. So there's always going to be a bit of, not I would say tension per se. I mean, Ireland have been, if we're being honest, they've been quite an outstanding rugby nation. They're the double World Cup. They're the double Six Nations winners. They won a Grand Slam last season. They've just been consistent over the past 6 to 8 years. But with the consistency has earned them a lot of, don't say domestic work, a lot of European work. I mean, if you look at how well their club teams, Leinster, Munster, also to an extent are playing in the URC and the European tournaments, they haven't quite had that kind of reward at the top end of the World Cup. I mean, look, remember that they beat New Zealand at home, the only team to have won a 3-match test series in New Zealand since South Africa did so in 1937. They were the first team to beat New Zealand in 2 consecutive tests at home since 1994 when France did so. So this isn't a team that should be underestimated. Same coach. Yes, there have been some players who've retired, Johnny Sexton in particular, but you realize that they still remain a very formidable, a very dangerous side. We saw that in Six Nations where they took apart a very strong France side. Yes, they were beaten by a very desperate England team, but that does not make them any weaker. That does not make them a team that should be underestimated.
In fact, just right on that point, Khanyiso, I mean, do you foresee or predict any chances for any upset during the test series with teams like, of course, some of the few that you've mentioned, I mean, Scotland, Argentina, and even New Zealand looking to settle a score?
Look, you wouldn't call it an upset. Remember now, I think the gap between the national teams has narrowed significantly. Look, I mean, England, for example, will be fancying the chances to beat New Zealand on Saturday. I think Wales will size Australia up and realize that this team is there to be taken on. I mean, Argentina, for example, will look at France and realize that have France recovered from their World Cup trauma? If the Six Nations is anything to go by, it wasn't. But if Antoine Dupont is part of the team, then it becomes a different story. So, but for between Ireland and South Africa in particular, you can't even call it an upset. South Africa have a lot to gain from beating Ireland. Bragging rights being one of the fact that they've gone 7 years now without having beaten Ireland. And if you remember, especially when they lost in 2017, 38-3, it heralded a significant change in South African rugby because it was the beginning of the end of the Alistair Coetzee era. So South Africa have a lot to gain from beating Ireland, not just once, but doing so twice, because there's always a conversation around the fact that as much as as South Africa have played well, they have not been able to get fully to grips with Ireland. They have not been able to get fully to grips with New Zealand. So over the next 2 years, South Africa have got a very good opportunity of actually putting their number over Ireland and also trying to beat New Zealand home and away to ensure that their status as world champions does not come under scrutiny as it has over the previous 3 times, where they have not always been as convincing as one would like world champions to be post their success.
And Khanyiso, I mean, looking at the team as well as its current form, I mean, the coach there, Erasmus, says he wants the team to measure itself against the world's top sides consistently, and facing Scotland, Wales, as well as England at the end of the year will actually be fantastic for the players themselves.
Yes, remember that England will most probably pick their team. If you look at what the composition of their team looks like for the test match against New Zealand in Dunedin, they've picked quite a core of the Northampton Saints players who won the Gallagher Premiership, 2 reached the semi-finals of the Champions Cup. So while their Steve Borthwick has retained a fair bit of consistency with the team that actually took him to the semi-finals, he's also looked back at that, how good that core is. Scotland, would underestimate Scotland at our peril. Remember that they came here to Loftus with the Glasgow Warriors side, beat the Bulls in the URC final 2 weeks ago. So there cannot be any underestimating what Scotland, especially when they're playing at Murrayfield in Edinburgh. They'll feel very buoyed, very G'd, especially with their success here. Wales in particular still have a lot to prove. I think they've got a slight problem with their depth starts at the moment, but they looked very competitive in the URC. If Warren Gatland is able to just gather his troops together for one proper slog, especially in November, they'll set them up for 6 Nations. He'll be doing himself a world of good. But before South Africa can even look ahead to the Rugby Championship, Ireland is a significant hurdle at the moment that needs to be crossed. And I think even then, South Africa, you look at the composition of the team. I think the Boks at a point where beating Ireland is what matters. How they do it, I don't think it's something they're completely worried about at the moment.
And in closing, very quickly, Khanyiso, I mean, the issue of broadcasting rights, has been quite a contentious one, particularly when it comes to sport like your rugby, which is seen as a sport that actually unifies the nation. I know that we have actually bagged 2 delayed, albeit delayed, test matches for the Springboks for this upcoming test series. So talk to us about that and how it's not assisting in terms of closing the gap in the promotion of all sports, in particular when it comes to rural as well as far-flung areas, which I need to also mention that most of course, some of the top players within some of these squads actually come from those rural areas and far-flung areas.
Before you even begin the conversation of test matches being flighted, you need to start to have the conversation of are rural kids watching school rugby on TV? The question is no. It is available on a mobile app from SuperSport. But then again, that is also quite a data-intensive purpose. So conversations around broadcasting rights of rugby would be, the end point would be the direct live transmission of test matches. That is a separate conversation altogether. I mean, remember that there's already been a conversation, a butting of heads with the ICASA, with the SABC and SuperSport in particular, MultiChoice in particular. But to even address the issue of broadcasting rights, you will need to flight junior rugby going up, the Currie Cup, women's rugby, first division rugby. For example, Craven took place on SuperSport. That is ideally a tournament that you want to see on free-to-air. So the wider conversations of test match rugby being flighted is just the end point of the conversation. The starting point needs to be developmental rugby so that those who aren't always in a position to watch school rugby and actually see that the opportunities available for them in school rugby, where they beat playing, coaching, and teaching, need to be able to see it on TV first. From there, from where the opportunities will grow further from there.